organized, not
Yeah.
just yet, but we'll get there. There we go. Mouth was
Nice
not
to
cooperating.
nice to see you.
Okay, I don't expect to be coming on camera, but you never know. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, better safe than sorry. So thanks for doing the check.
okay, thank you.
We checked everybody else already, so I think we're good.
All right, we are live. I'm going to go ahead and start recording too.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Thank you. I'm just gonna check in with everybody. Looks like people are slowly starting to join. We are going to be starting this meeting at 1 o'clock, which is just a few minutes out. So just thanks in advance to everybody for participating in today's RPAG meeting. And for those of you RPAG members, if you would take some time to introduce yourselves in the chat, name, title, entity, that would be great. Thanks. All right, we have lots of people starting to join. We have a couple minutes before we're officially getting started. Just wanted to welcome everybody to the June meeting of the Resource Planning Advisory Group for Puget Sound Energy. And as you're joining, RPAG members, if you could please take a minute to introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, your title, your entity, and make sure you select the hosts and panelists option in the drop-down menu so that everybody can see the conversation going on there. And we'll get started in about 1 minute. And Sam, you can start screen sharing. You read my mind. Thank you. Okay. We are at 1 o'clock. In the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to quickly introduce myself. My name is Hillary Wilkinson. I'm today's facilitator. I'm with Mal Foster and Alonji, and I'm here joined by several colleagues who are kind of helping me behind the scenes on advancing slides and other things like that. And you'll sort of meet them in a little bit. But for those of you RPAG members who weren't at the last meeting or attendees who weren't at the last meeting, this will be my second meeting that I'll be facilitating, taking over from Annie Kilberg-Smith. And I'm really happy to be here. I've had a little experience facilitating similar processes and really excited to be part of this one. So we have a full meeting today. I have mentioned it a couple times, but I'd love it if RPAG members could please go into the chat and introduce themselves with your name, your title, and your entity, so that everybody knows who is here, and especially who the RPAG members are. We're going to quickly walk through some introductory slides before we dive into the content of today's meeting. So Sam, if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide. I want to just make sure everybody is able to engage in this meeting as effectively as possible. So everybody has the opportunity to use the React feature, and that's that little bottom, click at the bottom, you can do a heart, you can do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So please feel free to use the React feature for all participants. RPAG members and Puget Sound Energy staff are welcome to use the chat feature. And anybody can use the show captions for real-time closed captioning. Next slide. Few requests from me, the facilitator, and you've heard these before, but it's always good to underscore them. We ask that you please engage constructively and courteously towards all participants, respect the role of the facilitator to guide the group process, really encourage you to try to avoid using acronyms. Please spell out acronyms and explain technical questions. Not everybody is as deep in this topic as RPAG members are, so just please remember to do that. We ask that you use the feedback form or email PSE at the email address here for any additional input to Puget Sound Energy. In the chat, my colleague Ben should have posted already the agenda and the slide deck for today's meeting. So I'm just not seeing that. So maybe it's there and I'm just not seeing it. But thank you, Ben, for that. And he is also going to link the feedback form. So please feel free to open that up. Other requests, I ask that you aim to focus on the webinar topics of today, and we'll talk a little bit about what our focus is today. As always, we'll have public comments at the end of the RPAG meeting. And I've already mentioned this, but RPAG members, please remember to click the everyone option in the chat so that everybody in this webinar can see the conversation. Okay, next slide. We always do a safety moment. Today is about grilling, and here are the tips. Always supervise a barbecue grill when in use. Don't add lighter fluid once coals have been ignited. Never grill indoors. Keep kids and pets away from the grill, and keep water or a fire extinguisher nearby. Next slide. We just have a few speakers today, and I will introduce them one by one. They should be no strangers to the RPAG. I believe all of them have spoken to you previously. Next slide. Here is our agenda. We're in the middle of a welcome and introductions. Then we're going to turn it over to Jen Colson, who's going to do a recap of the last meeting to make sure everybody kind of understands what came out of that meeting and where we're headed as an RPAG from here. Then David Landers will do an overview of the electric distribution system planning reference case. Then Sean Foster will do an electric transmission reference case overview of the local and regional transmission. And then we will have a next steps, kind of like talk about what's happening next, as well as the public comment opportunity. And then we will adjourn at 3 o'clock. Next slide. So this is what we're hoping to get out of today's meeting. We're going to start with this overview of the key outcomes of the May 28th meeting. We're going to continue the discussion of the 2027 Integrated System Plan reference case, which we've had for several meetings now and just getting deeper and deeper into it. We'll discuss the electric distribution system planning reference case, and we'll discuss the electric transmission, both regional and local reference case. Next slide. As always, we ask that you share your questions, reflections, and advice on today's topics RPAG members, I ask that you please wait until presenters are done to ask questions, and you can raise your virtual hand or a real hand, or post a question in the chat, and I will facilitate that at the end of each speaker's presentation. Unless there is a really unclear thing that needs kind of to be clarified in the moment, we welcome you to ask questions during the presentation, but if possible, please save it for the end. We'd love to know if anything's missing or unclear, flag areas where deeper discussion is needed in future meetings, and help us identify tension points and things like that. I have just a couple other things before I kick it off. Oh yeah, just a few important reminders. Again, to RPAG members, post your questions in the chat or raise a virtual hand. Please try to keep the questions focused on the topic kind of on deck at the moment. The session is being recorded. We ask that everybody kind of make space, so we will invite in as many questions and comments as we can from RPAG members, and my job will help be to make sure that all RPAG members have a chance to engage in the dialogue equally. And then last but not least, we invite your feedback on this session, and I mentioned it before, the feedback form is in the chat. Okay, so now we're going to pivot to the first topic. If you could go ahead and advance the slide, Sam. Jen Colson, who's the Director of Resource Planning Analytics, is going to provide a recap of the main outcomes of the last meeting. And specifically, I just want to underscore this. We heard a lot of feedback, and you'll see it in the feedback form from the last meeting about wanting more information about why the reference case B did not solve, and also specifically what were the RPAG input points on that. And that's why Jennifer is going to take a little bit of time to kind of dive into that and make sure that everybody's up to speed on those pieces, because we got a lot of questions about it. So with that, Jen, I am going to hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Hillary. Yeah, so I guess let's dive into the next slide. I'd like to start with just recapping the May meeting and what we discussed, and then also talk about the feedback that we received since that meeting and where we're going from here. So in the May RPAG meeting, we talked about the electric supply reference case and the gas supply reference case. These were not the preferred portfolio. These are starting points. In that meeting and conversation, we spent most of our time talking about the electric supply reference case, because the initial attempt at producing a solution for the electric supply reference case did not solve. This reference case that we attempted to solve for was based on inputs and assumptions that we've been working with this RPAG on since, I think it was late 2024 when this process initially kicked off. So those assumptions I'll outline in a moment. So the Aurora portfolio, just to level set on what we discussed and where we're going, is really working to solve three different main requirements: the effective peak capacity, the CETA renewable and non-emitting resources, and the energy demand. The model has to meet all three of these components at any given time to produce a feasible solution. In the reference case that we initially attempted to solve, we had removed the 2045 existing thermal fleet, and we did not offer emerging technology. So this portfolio only had resources that are commercially available today, meaning they can bid into an acquisition process right now. And in 2045, when we removed the existing thermal resources, we saw the peak need jump up to over 5,000 megawatts in that time period. And when the model went to solve that, there weren't enough resources available for the model to select to actually produce a feasible solution. So the team spent some time, because this hasn't really happened to us before, regarding what was that challenge. And that's how we determined that it was that 2045 peak need that was really producing the challenge on the feasibility. To work around that, they considered expanding commercially available technology. So meaning they broke the build limits that were associated with the 4-hour duration battery that is commercially available today from the E3 resource adequacy analysis. They provided tranches for the different capacity values. The tranche didn't go high enough to solve for this 2045 timeframe. So we allowed the model to just blow past that limit and continue to build. Some of the questions in the feedback report were questioning why we didn't increase the build limits on other resources, such as the wind and solar, resources as well. And that's a good question. Those are actually more constrained by the transmission than they are about the builds, the ELCC tranches. So it actually hit the transmission limits across the region in those zones before it hit the other limit. And in doing this, we had challenges with the model producing a solution as well. We had to feed the model to continue to get a solution for reference case A. The other reference case we discussed in the meeting was reference case B. This idea was to bring back in emerging technologies. And so for emerging technologies, we brought in mid and long duration energy storage, geothermal, small nuclear, and offshore wind, and renewable peakers. When we allowed the model to optimize across all of the emerging technologies, we were able to produce a feasible solution. There were questions in the meeting posed regarding different emerging technologies, their availability date, and the costs that we associated with those different technologies. And really where we got to the initial reference case and attempting to not include them was because there are varying opinions regarding where emerging technology should be offered to the portfolio and what cost. To achieve the solution, we had to bring those technologies back into the portfolio, and this allowed the portfolio to optimize at least cost on its own. And this is really important from an integrated resource planning first step, is that we wanted the portfolio to produce a solution on its own so that when we increase load in the scenario analysis, we're able to compare those results to the reference case. And we'll also use that to help us with our sensitivity analysis. The questions and input from the members has been really helpful in understanding the different components that we'd like to understand better and how best to mitigate any risk associated with emerging technology. So if we have differing opinions regarding when an emerging technology would emerge, these sensitivities will help us understand more pointedly the benefits of each different type of technology to the portfolio, more generally speaking. Again, this is just the beginning, it's not the answer, and we have a lot more modeling to come. We do see that because of the challenges with this reference case, especially the electric supply reference case that we talked about, there are a lot of near and long-term challenges with emerging tech if emerging tech does not emerge. And as we heard in the May meeting and the feedback report, there's a lot of opinions regarding where emerging tech and price availability is. And I think the biggest takeaway for us is that something needs to emerge, and we don't know exactly what that technology is, but we do know that something will need to happen for us to achieve our goals. And the biggest takeaway here is that there's a lot of value in the sensitivity analysis to continue to test those and ask those questions to ensure that we're mitigating any risks associated with our plans. The good news is by the 2030 ISP, we think there'll be more information regarding the potential availability of some of these emerging technologies, as some of the availability of those resources were listed as 2035. So that's only a few years out for it to really start taking off, for us to understand if it's going to be an option for us in the portfolio. There were also a lot of questions in the meeting and in the feedback report regarding the electric transmission and distribution assumptions that we had. And as well as the survey that we did at the end of the meeting. And that's how we really shaped the meeting for today and the content. We wanted to spend some time on the electric, local and regional transmission, as well as the distribution reference cases to help and everyone be on the same page regarding our initial assumptions before we start diving into scenarios and sensitivities. I did want to note that we did add a slide after we posted the material last week for next steps. So for the electric and transmission and the distribution, we just wanted to help clarify. We felt it was a little unclear, just to clarify what the work that you see today and the conversation and where it's going specifically for those areas. I think I can pause here. There's a lot of questions maybe. Or reactions, I don't know.
I'm not seeing anybody's hand raised. I did see a clarification. I think it's a clarification from Katie about what the Washington Administrative Code defines as commercially available. so folks can see it there. And Katie's hand is up, so we'll go ahead and call on you, Katie. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So it was mentioned that, there are differing opinions on what could be included in the commercially available bucket, but because, this was, these rules were worked out over a laborious, exercise, this definition was come to and is the official definition for commercially available. So I think that it's a good working assumption, especially, as we develop a reference case. So I included that in the chat. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
And Jen, I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat, so I think you can keep going.
Happy, yeah, there's much more great content to come. So let's go to the next slide. Just really outlining where we've been and where we're going. So the gray boxes reflect conversations we've had to date regarding this integrated system plan. The teal boxes are actually getting smaller or fewer now as we're nearing the end. Looking forward to the fall to start talking about that preferred portfolio development and the draft in December of this year. So a lot will be coming at us over the next few months, and it'll be exciting. So thank you for the time. That's all I had. I'm going to hand it over, I think, to Hillary.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Well, we have some time for other comments or questions for Jen. And Jen, I think I'll just kind of underscore, I think it's really important that we ground the group in what we heard at the last meeting and sort of how that shaped today's meeting and how PSE is addressing some of the really great questions that people have posed. So any other thoughts or comments or questions for Jen? All right, Jen, I think you're done. Thank you for your presentation. All right, well, we will switch gears now, and I'm going to introduce our next speaker, David Landers, who's the Director of Planning at PSE. And David is going to speak about the electric distribution system. So I'm going to wait till David is on screen.
All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good, so if we want to move to the next slide in the deck, or the next slide after that, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, David Landers, Director of System Planning here at PSE, so focused on both electric distribution system planning as well as our natural gas delivery system planning. And our intent this afternoon is to roll out a first conversation regarding the electric distribution system needs as analyzed in our reference case. Just a reminder, there's multiple components in a reference case. There's the generation resources, there's the transmission asset investment needs, customer programs and their impacts on load and performance of the system, and then our distribution system, both the electric and gas side. And so what I'll be focusing on today is our electric distribution system reference case. So if we could go to the next slide. This slide is kind of an overview of what I'll talk you through here in the next little bit. But first of all, just talking about alignment, just a reminder, this is the starting point for our analysis, and this is our outlook forecast of the capacity investments that are needed in the electric distribution system to serve the estimated loads that have been identified in the reference case to deliver deliver the resources to the identified electric customer loads in the reference case. And when we start this analysis, we have to think about what we're aligning to. And there's really two main questions that we ask ourselves there. First of all is, what are the loads that the system needs to serve, and where are those loads geographically across the system? That comes from the ISP load forecast, which you saw an update of that at the March RPAG meeting. So that's what we are using to inform us of what the loads will be on the system throughout the planning period from the starting point of 2028 through 2045 and into 2050. And then the other question is kind of the starting point of where are our investments start in the analysis. And so what you'll see in our reference case is we're assuming investments starting in the year 2028 and going from year 2028 through 2050. One thing I want to point out is we are currently in the midst of significant investment in our distribution system, our electrical distribution system. If you look back in the 5 years prior to the current 2-year multi-year rate plan that we are in, we made only one investment in a substation capacity upgrade on the distribution system. We added one substation bank in the years of 2020 through 2024. If you look at the level of investment that we're needing to make now and are making in our current multi-year rate plan 25-26, and then proposed in the years 27, 28, 29 in our current general rate case, it's about a 10x increase in investment in distribution, substation, and associated feeder capacity investments, which is being driven by building code changes, growth, and the electrification that is already occurring on our system. One thing else that I'd like to point out is that substation capacity investments are a bit lumpy. They come in 25 MVA, which is roughly 25 megawatt increments of increase. And so what we've seen over time is loads have gradually increased. We've pushed a lot of our distribution substations to the point that we're now needing to make these significant investments. So just the landscape that you see this reference case being presented today is we are currently in a period of significant capacity investment. But what we see in the reference case, moving on to the second item here, is we will still need continued steady investment in capacity throughout the entirety of the plan out to 2050. There will be a decline based upon, at least in the reference case, after this initial near-term capacity investment, but we still do see steady investment needed in system capacity throughout the reference case. Also, there's a note here on investments shifting. Something else that we have to think about is as we add capacity, as we add infrastructure, as we expand the electric system, there are more parts, components, and pieces that have to be operated and maintained. Switches, breakers, regulators, relays, the communication devices that keep it all interconnected and functioning and controlled. So we do see significant increase in maintenance costs and upkeep of the components in the electrical distribution system as well that come behind these initial investments in system capacity increases. And then I just want to point out, as we work our way through this analysis, again, this is the base point, the reference case, the starting point. Some things that we'll certainly be looking at in our scenario analysis is what are assumptions around electrification of natural gas load and conversion over to electric. What are the assumed applications of non-pipeline alternatives that include electrification? So that will be something that we're looking at, and some other considerations that will be important for us to think about will just be the customer programs, assumptions around customer participation in those programs, because those will change profiles of electric loads and consumption of electricity by our customers, which will have impacts on the needed investments in the electrical distribution system. So those are really kind of the 4 key areas. I wanted to lead off just pointing out the things that are important to consider in our reference case as we have developed it. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So there's really kind of 4, I'll call these key assumptions in the reference case, and there's kind of a lot of text in the table here to the right, but just to kind of talk through these 4 categories of assumptions. First of all, our load analysis for the reference case is at the substation level. So we have about 300 distribution substations currently in our electric delivery system. There's typically 4 to 5 feeders per transformer at a substation, transformer bank at a substation. So as far as an appropriate level of granularity for us to understand the local needs and specific timing of needed investments in substation capacity and associated circuits that substation serves, we felt that substation level analysis is the appropriate level of granularity for both the reference case as well as our various scenario analysis that we will be conducting. Capacity investments occur. This analysis we've divided it up into 5-year increments. Our current distribution planning protocols, typically every year we do a review of loading on all of our substations and circuits, and we're taking a 10-year look ahead. So it's a 10-year outlook of what anticipated capacity investment needs we should start planning for if we're crossing thresholds that trigger us starting to do capacity planning. So the ISP takes us into a further outlook all the way out to 2050 at this level of detail, but we have divided it up into 5-year increments. And so that's what you'll see as we work our way through this deck. And then just as an FYI, if you're seeing a need for a new distribution substation, the cost associated with that development, that substation, and associated local circuitry, modification or addition of feeders to connect our substation to our customers is about $36 million for a substation. And we'll be talking about the quantity of those that are needed within this reference case on an upcoming slide. And then I talked earlier about the need for maintenance and upkeep of the system. That grows as well. And in the model, we've applied a typical dollar per megawatt of capacity of distribution delivery system equipment to do that estimate of what we think the increasing cost of maintenance and upkeep of the system will be. Also, on what we expect the T&D infrastructure investments to be, we are in the reference case considering non-wire alternatives. So we've made some assumptions around where we think non-wire alternatives could help us to defer needed capacity investments in the system. And that's essentially what we get from non-wire alternatives is a delay or deferral and a need to make a capacity increase at a substation. And so we've identified about 10 locations within the reference case where we believe a non-wire alternative could defer the need for that substation. And I see a hand raised. Gwen, if you...
Yeah, thanks, David. Quinn, it looks like, do you have a clarifying question?
Yeah, I'm curious. It looks like there's just the co-located BESS is like what range of non-wireless alternatives is PSE kind of baked into the modeling here to select from?
Yeah, well, there are considerations, and when we're looking at load that needs to be served, I think there's the load forecast includes the impacts of our energy efficiency programs or conservation programs, demand response programs. When we're looking locationally specifically to avoid the need for local distribution system investment, that starts to look a little differently in that resource needs to serve local peak, not a system peak or resource need. So typically when we're looking at that locally, we are looking at a specific project that serves peak load, reduces the peak that specific substation transformer would need to serve. So the battery energy storage system, 5 megawatts of BESS is what we have looked at in a number of cases and seen to be probably the most opportunistic way to avoid needing to add another transformer bank or build a new substation to serve load growth. And there's a lot of text here at the bottom of this block, but basically what we're seeing there, for a non-wire alternative to be feasible, the need for capacity increase needs to be at least about 5 years out, 5 to 10 years out, to have time to develop that alternative and have it in place before the load arrives. And then ideally, that alternative would defer the need for that investment for the lifetime of what we would expect that best solution to be in place. So ideally over a 10 to 15 year measure life on a non-wire alternative. So ideally, if we apply a non-wire alternative, we don't need to invest in substation capacity for the same period of time that we expect that that non-wire solution to be in service.
So what you've kind of said is only battery energy storage.
Within this reference case, at this point in time, this is what we have considered, yes. And you'll also see in the table here, we found about 10 sites, and the reference case currently assumes about a third of those likely to be successful. So three substation capacity investments avoided. Just kind of within the framework of where we are today, we have pursued these solutions in some locations and have been evaluating them. We have yet to apply one successfully, but over the course of the plan, we do anticipate we will have an opportunity. So we have tried to bake that into our base reference case for the electrical distribution system. Could be something that gets considered or evaluated further in scenario analysis as we move forward on this. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So this slide summarizes what the need is in distribution system capacity investment across the time period from 2028 through 2050. So like I said, we are currently in the midst of significant distribution system capacity investment. So we currently, short term, within the next 5 years, we have 28 distribution substations that are forecasted to be overloaded or are overloaded and need capacity investments today to be able to continue to reliably serve load. As we move forward into years 5 through 10, this is a cumulative list of substations that are having loading that's exceeding their capacity. That grows to 42 substations. I said we analyze this in 5-year increments. You'll notice we skipped year 15 here. We just blocked those together. The next decade of investment. So we're to 63 substations at year 20. By the time we get to 2050, we've hit 71 substations of our existing approximately 300 distribution substations that need investment and capacity increases to serve the growing electric system load. So that's about a quarter of our distribution substations that need a capacity and increase an investment in increased capacity. And I'll just kind of make a sidebar comment here as well on loading and overloading. So when you see substations exceeding 100% load, I just want to, I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but I want to clarify that substations can be operated beyond their nameplate capacity. And that is actually something that we do. So a 25 MVA bank, a substation transformer that serves about 25 megawatts of load, we can actually operate in the wintertime, which we are currently winter peaking. We can load that up to 32 MVA or get about 128% of the capacity of that substation transformer in the wintertime. And that's because when it's cold, transformers dissipate heat better, and you can put more load on them without shortening the life of that equipment. So historically, we've had the advantage of being winter peaking, and the cold weather in the winter helps us meet capacity with our substations. In the summertime, we have to run much closer to the nameplate rating on substations. So something that I would just like to point out is, as we move into scenarios thinking about electrification of customer heating, if that comes with addition of air conditioning and increases our summer loads, that increased summer loading will start to remove some of this, we have our advantage that we have in serving peak load by loading transformers a bit beyond what their nameplate capacity is. So just a challenge for us to consider and think about as we work our way through scenario analysis. So if we could go ahead and
Okay. David, I'm gonna pop in for a second. We have one clarifying question in the chat that I wanted to flag for you, and then Quinn, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask if you could please hold your question or comment until David is done with his presentation, just in the interest of time and making sure we can hear from others as well. So the question from JP in the chat, are these loading levels based on a P50, P90, or what percentile forecast?
I'm going to have to show my. Okay, I want to. I'm pretty certain it's P50, but I would like to get at least a thumbs up from somebody on the load forecast team or Jen that is the correct forecast that we are using.
Yeah, this is based on that reference case demand forecast that had the P50 in there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for jumping in, Jen. I wanted to confirm that. Okay, so if we go ahead and move to the next slide, what you'll see next is a visual representation of this increased loading on our electric delivery system. I really just wanted to put this in the deck to just show you locationally where the loads are showing up. So if we look 10 years out and then 25 years out, you can see where we're bumping up, and exceeding 100% capacity on our distribution system. One thing you'll notice is where we tend to exceed that capacity is kind of in the core areas of customer load. I think one thing that contributes to that is where we have high density of customer load and substations are surrounded by other substations, we rebalance circuits, we rebalance loads across substations to fully utilize substations before we make additional capacity investments. So just the nature of the location of the load enables us to more fully utilize our assets in those dense areas before we make additional investments. But being fully loaded and fully utilizing those assets, this is where the challenges start to show up when we have increasing load associated with electrification or growing electric vehicle load and building code changes. So you can see this just shows locationally where some of our greatest challenges will be and needing to continue to increase system capacity to serve growing load. We go to the next slide. So this slide really just sums things up in dollars, amounts of investment across these incremental time periods. I want to point out the math in this chart is a little bit funny, and actually, if you add the columns, they won't add up exactly. The reason for that, and maybe we should provide a revised version of this. This first row are system capacity investments from 2026 through 2030. As I mentioned earlier, our reference case is based on investments from 2028 and beyond. So what you are seeing in those capacity investments in the first row, the $1,007 million, includes investments in our current multi-year rate plan in the first year of our proposed multi-year rate plan in the GRC. So actually what's in the reference case is only about half of that investment, which is the total investment you see over in the third column for 2026 through 2030. So about $660 million is what you see between 2028 and 2030 of investment in the distribution system capacity, and then that would, if you add those total investments up in the third or fourth column in the table, the 4,123 million is actually 3,776 million. So just want to point out that the numbers don't add up exactly, because that first row shows our current existing investments that are taking place prior to the reference case. And then another thing that's a little odd, if you look at the bullet points on the spending drivers, where we talk about the megawatts of load growth in those incremental years, it looks backwards, 2035 to 2030 or 2045 to 2036. The way to read that is 20 load, peak load or system load in 2030 minus 2035 minus 2030. You know, it's the incremental gain in megawatts in that time period. So I just wanted to point that out to you as well. But as you can see here, reference case investments, capacity investments is, if you pull out the investments before the 28 start date, we're about $2,099 million of capacity, 1,677 million of incremental maintenance that will come throughout the course of the period between now to 2050, which is a total of about 3,776 million of investments in distribution system capacity. And these are capacity investments. What we're presenting does not include other investments in the distribution system, such as our reliability investments, our wildfire risk mitigation investments that are currently under the wildfire tracker. Also includes things like public improvement projects, where we need to relocate facilities for public roadway projects and other things like that. So this is truly system capacity investment needs that we are presenting here. So we can go to the next slide. So this is what that looks like graphically over the course of the period from 2028 through 2050. As I said earlier, a lot of significant capacity investment taking place right now. If you look at those columns for 28, 29, and 30, that's about half of the total investment that's taking place in current multi-year rate plan in the first year of our proposed 3-year plan in the current GRC. Once we make that step up in system capacity, then you see a continued steady investment of about, initially starts out, well, it's about $165 million a year average investment that's needed in the distribution system over the course of the plan from 2031 on out to 2050. Next slide. So here's kind of the wrap-up slide. So just kind of wrapping up where we are. Again, how will these results be used? We're doing locational analysis at the substation level. This analysis will show us where we have those step-up investments needed in capacity. So when it tells us when substation capacity projects are needed across the course of the plan. And then also through that analysis, we can look and identify opportunities to possibly defer those through non-wire alternatives. Also from a sensitivity analysis perspective of NWA feasibility, customer programs. And so moving on to next steps, it's going to be very important that we continue to analyze the electric system investments in alignment with what comes out of the natural gas system, reference case and scenario analysis regarding non-pipeline alternatives and the amount of electrification that comes from that, as well as identifying opportunities for targeted coordinated program delivery, energy efficiency demand response, and other customer programs. And then just a reminder, kind of the final bullet here is the reference cases. It's the baseline. It's our starting point for scenario and sensitivity analysis. So that's an very high level, quick overview of our electric distribution system reference case.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that presentation. A lot of information. We have about 10 minutes for questions and comments. Quinn, I know you have a question. Before I pull you on camera, if you could just wait for a second. I want to see if there's any other RPAG members who haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, who have any questions or comments for David. And I see Megan's hand raised. And I'm going to ask RPAG members, as you ask questions and make comments, if you're able to come on camera, it would be great to see you. So please do that if you can. Megan, go ahead.
Hi, David. Hi, Hillary. I had a question on slides 18 and 19 where you're looking at the growing electric system. Does that include planned electrification programs on the gas side? I would just love to hear a bit more about that iterative analysis between the gas and electric systems. Thank you.
No, thank you, Megan, for that question. And the answer is no. This is the reference case, and so and I know the reference case for the natural gas system is yet to be discussed in the context of an RPAG meeting, but that reference case on the gas system assumes continued relatively stable customer counts, although load will be declining. But there's very little increase in electric system load assumed from natural gas, from electrification of currently served natural gas end use loads in this reference case. So all that electric system investment required on top of that will be in addition to what you see in this reference case.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow-up question. As the natural gas reference case is developed, will that then go back and inform the electric reference case? Will this be changed at all in response to that, or is this getting locked in right now?
Well, I think we're pretty closely aligned on them right now as far as those assumptions, but where the coordination will be necessary will be as we get into the scenario analysis and the assumptions that are made in the scenario analysis of movement toward electrification, ensuring that we understand where those assumptions on the gas system impact the needed investments on the electric system.
Okay, thank you.
Jen, you came on screen. I don't know if you have additional commentary to add or not.
No, I think that was helpful, David. Yeah, I think just to reiterate, the reference case is just starting with that base forecast where we didn't have a large amount of electrification. We do have a little of the target electrification pilots and the CCA low income funding incorporated in those demand forecasts, but these plans are just based on that. And then the scenario analysis, to your point, Megan, is really that iterative analysis between the two. So we just need to just baseline, and then we'll evaluate the demand increment on the electric system and the decrease on the gas system and how those would interplay together through the scenario analysis.
Thank you. Yeah, it appears to me like the reference cases should be pretty aligned too on the assumptions that they're making on both systems.
Oh, they are. Yeah. So those inks and decks from those programs I mentioned are consistent across both the electric and gas forecasts. The assumptions and inputs, if they need to be the same, if they're the same inputs, they're aligned on the gas and electric as well. So everything is consistent across the reference cases to give us that baseline. And then on the scenarios and whatnot, we're changing assumptions, right, based on that scenario and that parameter. And then those forecasts were developed together to complement each other.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Megan, for that question. And our next question is from Callie. And I forgot to ask people, in addition to coming on camera for RPAG members, if you could also introduce yourself and say who you're with. That would be great too. Thanks.
Thanks, Hillary. I'm Callie. I'm with Public Counsel. Looking back at slide 17, based on what you said, David, about being able to only in the winter operate up to like 128% capacity of the substation, I think breaking this out by season could be helpful to look at, or if you have a list of number of substations in winter that will be like over 128% versus in summer, like just a little more detail on some of those specifics that you guys have the expertise in would be helpful for me.
Okay, yeah, that's standard analysis in our planning assumptions. We look at both peak winter and peak summer loading. So that's something that we have and can make sure to include that in the information we share.
Thanks.
Thanks for that question, Callie. I see JP's hand up. Go ahead, JP.
Yeah, thanks. This is JP Carvalho, Berkeley Lab. Thanks, David. This is great content. Earlier in the slides, you presented that you had considered battery energy storage and you had made an assumption about 30% success rate. I wanted to understand what was the method used to get to that 30% and what do you consider success rate or success? I think it's the term you used.
Yeah. So essentially success would be actual ability to implement and defer a substation capacity investment for a period of 10 to 15 years. The success rate basically is based upon where we have had some projects and have sought to apply these non-wire alternatives to defer the investment. We've yet to be successful with them, but we know that we don't anticipate that to be sustained going forward, right? As technology advances, as cost of technology becomes more on par with other type of traditional capacity investments, we do, and we'll continue to analyze and evaluate and look for those opportunities. So really, for the reference case, it was a first pass estimate of what, based upon experience, we felt would be a reasonable assumption.
Okay.
David, was there a slide associated with that question? We're trying to get the right slide up on deck.
Yeah, I think if you looked at slide 20.
Okay. Thanks, Sam.
No, wait, sorry, my numbers are, I'll go back a couple more. Go back one more. There we go. So expected infrastructure investments, that was where we had a bullet point and identified 10 substations could potentially be deferred. And then kind of the assumptions of when that loading shows up and when, basically I talked through the timing of what makes a likelihood of success of when the load needs to be served is how we select when we think we have time to develop and can successfully implement a non-wire alternative. And so that was how we got to our estimate of potentially three substations in a reference case scenario.
Thanks, David. Thanks for that question, JP. Okay, Quinn, thank you for your patience as we let some other questions go first. Go ahead.
No problem. Happy to defer to others when possible. So I'm kind of curious. I think I'm kind of drawing conclusions on is that, so we have a presentation on substation capacity. Is that also kind of the case that I'm kind of curious how that's going to flow down to some of the poles and wires of it. Like, are you seeing that some of the distribution also suffering from overloading and in need of investment? Is that kind of considered within the model? And if so, how?
It's considered within the model, and it's considered within, I threw on earlier the typical cost, what's actually on this chart in the second row, about $36 million per substation. That cost estimate includes modifications and upgrades to feeders that are served by the substation. So anytime we do substation capacity upgrades, that involves creation of new feeders, modification of existing feeders, rebalancing of load across feeders. So those investments are included in these costs of at the substation level of investment.
Great. And then so is that, I'm kind of curious where some of this data is coming from. Is that just from AMI? Is there technology within the substation lets you know that it overloads or what capacity it's at?
Yeah, so our modeling of load on the system, Synergy is our power flow model tool, which we do annual analysis on all of our circuits, all of our substations, and then have thresholds and triggers that identify when we've crossed those thresholds that trigger development of capacity projects. So just for example, we have distribution planning guidelines that lay all of this out and define it. So when it We are looking ahead at a 10-year outlook based upon our load forecast. If we see an individual substation loading beginning to exceed 75% of capacity, that triggers us to begin planning. If it's in a high growth area, and we have a definition for a high growth area, which means that growth, if that location is exceeding the county, we are seeing that in load requests, that growth is exceeding the county projected growth rates. We lower that threshold to 60% to trigger planning capacity investments for that substation. And
And are you? Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
I was just going to say, I talked earlier about being able to operate a substation beyond nameplate rating, but something else that's important is we don't want all of our substations fully loaded, 100% loaded, because when you need to do maintenance work on the system, when you need to take a breaker out or a transformer out to do maintenance work, we have to move the load over and have other substations serve that load while we do that work. And that's also how we restore service when we have outages and for example, winter storms. If there are components damaged or substations out of service, we pick up load from other substations. So, ideally, we have that flexibility and capacity to move load around to maintain reliability of service to our customers as well.
Sorry, I know I have a battery of questions, and I see Hillary. I'll ask one more.
Yeah, one more, Quinn, and then we're going to have to move on to the next presentation. But go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So for the demand response and energy efficiency, to clarify, that's the reference case that was presented last month of basically kind of hitting pretty close to what the 1589 or DALKE targets were.
Yeah, that's
if you response in E. Sorry.
Exactly. If you look at the components that go into to our reference case, the customer programs are an element of that, and the impacts of those programs on the load go into our reference case analysis.
And those were not distributed across the entire service territory equally. They're targeted. Is that right?
We, I believe, do a peanut butter spread on those. We do a county level forecast and a programmatic forecast. If it's not a targeted program, a general program forecast, it gets spread across the service area.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for that presentation, and thanks to the RPAG members for great questions and comments. We are going to shift gears, and we just heard about the electric distribution reference case, and now we are going to hear about the electric transmission reference case. Sean Foster, who is the director of the electric transmission at PSE, is going to do that presentation. So, Sean, the mic is yours.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Fantastic. So hi, everybody. Sean Foster, Director of Electric Transmission. So our teams focus on two primary objectives. One is transmission planning for PSE system, and also in meeting our FERC and NERC obligations to collaboratively plan with our neighbors like Bonneville and the rest in accordance with FERC orders 890, 1000, 1920, et cetera. And so next slide, please. Oh, I forgot to mention and say that the other part of the team that we have also administer our transmission tariff. So respond to interconnection requests, transmission service requests, conduct market settlements for participation in EAM, and then ultimately in Markets Plus or whatever market paradigm we have in the future. And so first, we're going to talk about local transmission planning. We want to, have some conversation around that. And we want to, when we talk about transmission, we want to talk about it in a couple of different ways. I look at it from the perspective that there are really sort of three buckets that you look at transmission in. You look at sort of your local transmission system planning bucket, which is what we're going to talk about next. And then there's sort of the interface, your interfaces with your neighbors. And what does that look like? And then the last bucket, we're not going to talk about so much about that today. That's how do you enable interregional transmission reaching far away resource zones. Next slide, please. So as we talk about local transmission planning, historically our planners have focused on local system reliability, making sure that we can serve load reliably. We have many NERC transmission planning standards that we have to adhere to and make sure that the system is planned to, that results in a reliable load service obligation or ability to serve our customers, excuse me. With that being said, given the fact that we're going through this resource transition, here locally, of course, but also sort of more regionally with other states on the West Coast, that, impacts the transmission system. And I think, like we have talked about previously, transmission system impacts can, show up outside of your border if it's something that's happening on your system, and vice versa. Something that's happening somewhere else can show up on our border. So we have these NERC planning standards that were sort of originated out of a result of a lot of the major blackout incidents you've seen across the country over the years, over the past several decades. And so we have those obligations. We have to undertake that on an annual basis. And so that's where we've primarily focused. And then, of course, we have our tariff transmission planning obligations. So to the respect that we have interconnection requests for new resources, transmission service requests. We're, of course, a FERC jurisdictional utility. We have to respond to those. We have to provide open access to the transmission system to anybody who wants to potentially apply to try and use the transmission system, whether that be for interconnection purposes or transmission service purposes, et cetera. Additionally, we have the obligation to plan for the resources of the entity that's serving load on our transmission system. And so for us, that means taking the outputs of resource planning and start to consider that as inputs into our transmission planning obligations. And recent IRP portfolios have identified significant on-system resources are going to be needed to enable clean energy goals. And so, like I was just describing, our planning process need to adapt to be able to contemplate that. Resource integration will likely drive system improvements and require reasonable assumptions of where these resources may be developed. And so, when you look at the life cycle of how resources get developed, it doesn't necessarily align, or how they get planned, doesn't necessarily align with the existing transmission planning processes that exist today. When you're speaking of interconnection or transmission service, that is a customer coming to you as a transmission provider saying, I want to move power from point A to point B, or I want to interconnect this resource at point A. When we're talking about how to plan for new resources, what we're talking about is trying to use sound judgment and good utility practice to understand what do we think the likelihood of where new resources will be located, in what amounts, what types could they be, because that has a big impact on how you plan for the system. A solar system has a different profile and impact to the transmission system in comparison to what a wind system has, for example. And so in the most recent electric progress report, which unfortunately is 2023, what we see is we have a significant need for on-system resources. And again, this is local planning that we're talking about within the confines of our existing system today, that are pretty significant. Roughly 1,300 megawatts in 2030, 1,911 megawatts by 2035, 2,285 megawatts by 2040, and nearly 3,000 megawatts by 2045. So those are significant numbers, and the system isn't built for that today. So next slide, please. So in order to try and assess what that means, the teams, and not just my team, but others at PSE, put their heads together and tried to identify what are the right scenarios that should be analyzed. Again, because this isn't a very cut and dry request from a specific transmission customer where they're saying, I want to interconnect here and I want to move power to there. This is a scenario where we all have to put our heads together and identify what are the likely scenarios, and you need a few of them, because whatever you come up with as scenario one, there's almost 100% certainty that that's not actually what happens with respect to the ultimate build out of the system. And so you need a varying range of scenarios. And so the teams work together to develop 5 different scenarios to analyze, looking at the capacity numbers out of the 23 electric progress report. And so in thinking about that, we wanted to identify what do we need to support the added resources in the PSE zone? What is the cost potentially going to be for those local system upgrades needed to integrate these resources? And so we used, again, good sound judgment, information from the various teams that are working on it. We tried to align it with the interconnection queue and RFP proposals we've seen historically. We tried to align with the fact that most resources will perform the best and have likely the least amount of transmission system upgrades if they're interconnecting to the 230 kV system or above. And we looked at 3 geographically focused areas. So what we call the northern region, a southern region, and a western region out on the peninsula. So next slide, please. Reference case transmission costs incorporated both presumed local and regional system builds. So that means what was already in the works effectively, both on our system and of our neighbors. Because again, we've talked about it previously in these RPAG discussions, but we have to remember that the transmission system is networked. What happens on our system impacts our neighbors and vice versa. And so we have to account for what are the topology changes, the system topology changes that they're seeing out on their system, because we have to make sure that we're appropriately modeling those as well. And so we did this with the goal of trying to identify what's an appropriate network upgrade cost to use in the ISP as we move forward. And again, using those 5 different scenarios, we studied what does 2,000 megawatts of resources added by 2035 look like, and then an additional 1,000 megawatts of resources added by 2045. Again, thinking back to the previous chart that identified that by 2045, we're going to need almost 3,000 megawatts of resources. And what we found is, we did a high and a low case. And what we found is something fairly significant. In the low case, we need to reconductor some 220 miles of our 115 kV system. In the high case, that increases to 305. We need, in the low case, 30 greenfield miles of transmission. In the high case, we need 130 miles of greenfield transmission. In the low case, 6 new bulk transformers. In the high case, 10. In the low case, 1 new substation. In the high case, 5. And in terms of total upgrade costs, in the low case, roughly $1 billion. In the high case, roughly $2.5 billion. I just saw a question in there. We'll get that information. I wasn't, since I just recently started at PSE last fall, I wasn't a part of this study. We can definitely get that information for you, though. Next slide, please. And so with that, the reference case that over this ISP period, or this RPAG and the last RPAG that we've been walking you through has utilized the output of that. So we used sort of a base, so not the low, not the high, for the assumption of cost per megawatt of transmission system upgrades. And so we use the assumption that 3,000 megawatts of new on-system resource build would require $1.5 billion in transmission builds. And so that's, again, it's between the low and the high on the previous slide. There's a practical limitation for PSE zone builds, but the limit is difficult to define. With that much transmission upgrade, we have some real questions around the ability to permit that much work. As many folks are probably familiar, there was a project several years ago that was just a 16-mile upgrade of a line in an existing corridor that took the line from 115 kV to 230 kV, and it took approximately, I think, 15 years, as I understand. Again, I wasn't here at the time to do that work. And so there's some questions about in the local system upgrades, to build out the system necessary to be able to integrate 3,000 megawatts of resources. Can you actually do that? That's not answering the question of whether or not you can actually permit those resources either. Resource needs are expected to be incremental due to the challenge of siting them. So that just to that point, can you permit them? Can you site them? There's probably a lot of tension that will happen as you try to deploy that much infrastructure, here within the PSE service area, because, there are so many folks who will be impacted by it for one reason or another. Factors influencing resource siting and transmission include, of course, city and county policies on resource development, local codes, of course, zoning is a big challenge. Land availability, that's a big challenge as we think about transmission and resources. So, for example, a lot of our infrastructure, our transmission infrastructure, was built many decades ago. Communities have grown up around that infrastructure, and so in order to upgrade those lines, if you need to do that, there may be some friction with the communities that have built up and around the transmission infrastructure, the transmission lines, since they were originally built and deployed, many years ago. And so that raises some challenge with respect to land availability. And then, of course, as we've talked about, permitting, of course, is a challenge. It's, we have to be honest and recognize the notion that in Washington that can be a challenge, much like many of the other states in the Western U.S. Next slide, please. And so that gives you sort of a construct of what we've been analyzing for local system builds. Because of the challenges that we think probably exist with deploying that many new transmission projects in our local service territory, and that many new resources in the local service territory, because of all those challenges that we talked about, we would be remiss if we didn't also explore what it would take to bring to bear regional transmission. So if you can't locally, how do we reach out beyond what are considered now today our traditional system territory to be able to go and attract those resources? Katie, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, Katie, go ahead and come on camera and ask your question.
Thanks, Sean and Hillary. So before we move on to regional transmission, I thought I would just ask my question about the previous slide 25 before we get too far ahead. So this slide says the ISP uses the PSE zone to balance resource needs after regional transmission capacity has been fully utilized. And I'd like to hear, I guess, the meaning of balance, and in that sentence, trying to understand, I assume that this is a single optimization, but the way that this is written, it sounds like, it's done in a sort of multi-stage fashion. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I think, if I'm hearing the question right, I think the answer is we have to wrestle with the fact that there are real transmission constraints that exist regionally. And it's what we're going to talk about here in just a moment. The nearest to us are some that actually, exist within our service territory, whether you're talking about flow gates or paths, whatever term you want to use, whether you want to use a Bonneville-centric term or something that's more widely used in an entity like WEC, which is path. You have like north of Echo Lake, south of Custer, that exists, right square through the middle of our service territory. With respect to reaching out further beyond our system to be able to reach other resource zones, we have west of Cascades, south. And so we have to, define what we think the limits are for that. And to the extent that we realize that in order to bring transmission like that to bear, we're going to have to be able to balance those needs here locally. And I see Elizabeth came on camera, so maybe she has some thoughts that she wants to add to it as well.
No, thank you, Sean. Yeah, just to clarify what's happening is this is a pretty complex problem to be solving. And so what's happening is we have very limited transmission getting into all these other zones. And so what we're going to see is an initial run through to optimize the resources, making sure we're grabbing the least cost resources to meet all the requirements. And as we move into the future, we start exhausting out these transmission zones. And as we start exhausting out transmission zones, the model will then move to the different zones. It may not be the least cost resource, but it's going to where we have transmission available and can get to resources. And once all zones are exhausted, it may turn to what is the PSE zone to try and finally balance out the remaining resources. And even though it might not be the lowest cost resources, but it's what's available to get a full balance of resources to meet planning margin and CETA requirements.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Glenn, I see your hands up.
Yeah,
if you don't,
wait,
don't-
sorry, Quinn, before you go, I'm just gonna pop in real quick and check in with you, Sean. I know you just have a few more slides and we have another half hour, so okay to take a pause and take some more questions now.
Yeah, I think so. I prefer these sort of presentations to be more conversational, right? To allow folks
right.
as long as we have time that allows, and it looks like we do.
Yeah, looks
Yeah.
like we have time. So Quinn, we'll do you first, and then I see there's a question from Dennis in the chat that we'll turn to next.
Yeah, if you don't mind going back to, I have this as slide 23 with the scenarios. So I think maybe I missed this. Is it the one ahead of that? Yes. So is this, if I understand this right, these are the scenarios to which PSE would upgrade specific lines, and then the stars represent
Resource location, yeah.
the resource location.
Yeah.
And you said this was from kind of based off the 23 progress report?
It was yeah, that was one of the inputs. And again, wasn't here at the time, so don't have all the details in terms of what went into the sausage making as part of developing those slides. But speaking to what typically happens, or not slides, but scenarios, what typically happens with scenario development is you start with inputs like that. Another input was the large generator interconnection queue that PSE had been experiencing at the time. Another input was where actual bids were coming in through the RFPs as well, to really try and use available information, real information, not just where we think resources may show up at some point, but real information to help inform what those scenarios would be.
Got it. Okay, and that's excuse me, like how recently has this then been refreshed? Like, are we talking recently or more or less as like things have been produced?
So this has not been recently refreshed, and that's something that we need to work on is looking at it, because as you look at the reference case for the 27 ISP that was rolled out, the resource need is continuing to grow, and so we're going to need to refresh that look. And the resources that are identified in the reference case, and then ultimately what will be identified in the preferred portfolio, are going to look different. So we're going to have to refresh that. But we, also want to have what the updated information looks like coming out of the more recent RFPs, et cetera, also look like, as well as being informed by the transitional cluster studies, which are currently in a restudy process right now.
Got it. And just to re-clarify, so the scenario, the stars on this slide represent resources, but is that like a generic resource? Is it resource agnostic? Is it a specific, like, oh, that's a battery?
Yeah, I'd have to go back to the team and understand what was baked into each of those scenarios. I don't have that in front of me.
Okay.
I can help a little bit, I think, if that's okay, Sean.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the call out, Quinn, on these. I've skipped over the scenario line there, and I realize now why that's very confusing to everyone. So when they're talking scenarios here, kind of what Sean was mentioning is this is based on the 23 reference case output. And the challenge and something that we'll have to continue to evolve in our analytical process here is it's like a chicken and egg with the transmission. They don't know where the need has to come, so they know where to build it, so they know what transmission to do. But if they don't know where it is, then they can't tell you what the upgrade is, right? So we started with the 23 EPR to provide the volume of the resources and the timeframes, and the scenarios on this slide specifically is related to different scenarios for generation siting based on all those things that Sean was talking about. So not related or equal to in any way the ISP scenarios that we're doing. This was really a modeling effort for the local transmission system on where, if I have this volume of peakers, where could we site them? And there's various options for that, right, across the portfolio. So that's what the scenarios on the screen are referring to specifically. And then so the resource mix is just based on that output. Your question about the update, so now we've run the reference case of the 27 ISP, and part of the team is looking at, okay, now we have this new output and this new volume of resources within the PSE system. How does that align to what we've modeled here? And are there additional costs that we're missing because we need more generation than we had planned and analyzed from this prior work? And so that's kind of how we're going to handle it for this one, just because we need to know, we need to have more information regarding the volume and the magnitude and type of resource. And then we're making assumptions on where they would sit on the system based on these different scenarios. So.
Got it. Thank you. I'll let y'all get to Dennis's question.
Yeah, and Dennis, what can be done to overcome challenges with siting, transmission, and development? That's a question we could probably spend lots of time debating. It depends on how you approach it. Every city and county and has their own code and zoning associated with it. So then that calls into the question whether or not the state FSEC process can be helpful or not. So, at the end of the day, infrastructure deployment has impacts. And so you need to find what the right way is to achieve that in a way that compromises and brings everybody who's impacted along. And so it's a very simple question that's not very simple to answer, and I wish I had the magic key on that one, but I just don't.
And
Well, yeah.
go ahead, Dennis.
Yeah, I just thank you, Sean. I kind of threw in another question behind it. Is there a plan for a joint body to work these issues over the next 2 decades? Because I realize if you were to go through and piecemeal this thing through, I don't believe it's realistic if you're going to hit any of your targets. I think that it really does take a concerted effort by a lot of the municipal bodies, planning, regulation, state, even some of our own partners along with PSE to work this out together. So it is a simple question, but ultimately, just like you have to get the money and you have to do the engineering, this egg's got to get cracked too and figured out.
You will not get any argument from me. To the extent that this joint body or work effort or legislative effort or whatever shape it takes happens, PSE will be front and center, and want to work and collaborate with others to try and, figure out how to solve it.
What's the first step?
Yep.
I'm asking, what's the first step in this?
Oh, what is the first step?
Yeah.
That gets into the political realm, Dennis, and that's not my that's not my strong suit.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thanks for the questions, Dennis. Very thoughtful questions. We have more time. Are there others on the RPAG who haven't had a chance to ask a question of Sean that have any questions or comments? You can come on video or post a question in the chat. All right, Sean, I think you have a few more slides. Oh, wait, we got Quinn back. Hey, Quinn, why don't we
I'll hold up.
let's let Sean finish his slides and then we'll circle back. Okay, thanks.
All right, I think what slide were we on? We were on regional, just starting in the regional. Yeah, so we can jump to the next slide. And so, as we talked about at the last RPAG, we've identified some zones with respect to where resources could potentially come from. The previous electric progress report identified renewable zones in eastern Washington, in Montana, and east, and also Idaho, Wyoming area. And because, again, of the way the system is currently built, the topology of the system, effectively, the majority of those um, resources to deliver to PSE load are going to ultimately end up having to flow through Washington and east to west across the Cascades. And so that represents one of the most complicated constraints that we have. It's the one that's closest to home, but others exist. There are other constraints that exist with getting additional resources out of Montana through Path 8, and there's another flow gate or congestion point out there called west of Hatway, and then additionally getting any resources from Idaho or Wyoming or points south will cross other points of congestion like the Idaho to Oregon path, and others as well. And so with that said, even if you can solve for Montana, even if you can solve for Wyoming and Idaho, they can get you to Eastern Washington, but we're still going to have to solve for Eastern Washington as well. So next slide, please. As we think about it, and sort of with the recognition that cross Cascades capacity is a critical first step to deliver clean energy. We have to start thinking about how much capacity do we need to potentially bring to bear? What does that look like? What's the timeline for it? But again, it is sort of the linchpin, the keystone to be able to accessing any of these other areas out there. And it's going to take a significant need. When again, pulling back to the last time this analysis was done for the 23 electric progress report, we have access to about 1,757 megawatts of capacity. In 2035, the analysis at that time identified needing a total of 2,739 megawatts. By 2040, that grows to 4,435. And by 2045, it grows again to almost 5,300 megawatts there at 5,279. Next slide, please. So to that end, we need to start strongly thinking about and considering what a transmission solution would look like to be able to reach, again, the resource zone that just exists just across the Cascades, 100 miles away, but also to be able to unlock those further flung resources that have different varying and in some cases better capacity factors or different resource profiles that help meet our load profile more readily and provide that resource diversity that's also so helpful to reliability to the system. So we're evaluating options to increase capacity across the Cascades to the tune of about 3,500 megawatts right now. Due to the scale of that need, what that would require is at least 2 additional 500 kV circuits across the west of Cascades North path. That could be 2 circuits in parallel. It could be dual circuit, etc. Katie, I saw your question in there. That's a tough one to answer. All things perfect. If you had the right of way and you just wanted to start building, you had a go decision to build it today, you could design and build it in 5 years. That's not the hard part. The hard part is the right of way acquisition, the permitting, dealing with you know, all of the challenges that come from folks who are concerned about the deployment of infrastructure near them, and they're valid concerns, right? And that's the hard part about transmission development. And you know, so you know, best case scenario is probably 10 years. That's if everything goes perfectly. You know, we've seen examples elsewhere, you know, where you know the most recent and you know regionally comparable project that we could talk about is Idaho and Pacific Corps' B2H project under construction now. I think it's almost legal of legal drinking age. I think that project's been in flight for like 20 years or 19 years. You know, so that's the most recent significant 500 kV AC build that's happened in the region or is underway in the region. You know, PSE, of course, has our own experience with a much more local project, you know, several years ago that took about 15 years just to go 16 miles. And so it can be a challenge, but the reality is if we don't get started now effectively, we're not going to have any hope of being able to bring those on. All right, next slide, please. Additionally, we're exploring other opportunities to reach some of these resource zones as well. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but PSE is a participant in evaluating what's called the North Plains Connector. It's an HVDC line that actually is would connect the western interconnection with the eastern interconnection, and on the eastern side of the interconnection, it would connect to two different markets. It would connect to MISO and SPP. The western terminus is at Colstrip, which of course PSE has ownership in the Colstrip transmission system, and the Colstrip substation as well. You know, that project was a GRIP grant recipient of which was the largest GRIP grant, $700 million. It's subsequently been reduced now down to, I believe the number is $610 million because of some requirements of the current administration. But it would add access to North Dakota wind, which correlates well to our load shape, and again provides market access to both SPP and MISO. Something that's significant is that, you know, recent studies done by others have indicated that the region, the Pacific Northwest, potentially has up to a 9 gigawatt shortfall in capacity. This project could bring to bear about 3,000 megawatts by itself of interregional capacity, and so it could help significantly contribute to providing interregional access to help solve some of those challenges as well. So still ongoing analysis there, but something else that PSE is contemplating. Next slide, please. Again, we're remiss if we don't talk about Bonneville and all the things that are happening with them. I'm sure many folks have you know, seen the recent news with them naming the new administrator. We're all waiting on pins and needles to understand, you know, how that new administrator is going to impact BPA. You know, will it make them more aggressive? Will it make them more willing to be collaborative and work with others, and not just you know, primarily focus on what they call their preference customers or the public utilities, like, you know, the co-ops and the PUDs and et cetera. You know, will they take a different position on how they think about utilization of the transmission system? We just don't know yet. You know, the new administrator, I think, will be sworn in on Monday, and we'll see where that goes. You know, however, you know, Bonneville does have some projects that are under development. Again, you know, we think until we see more from where the agency is heading, you know, that there's some risk associated with some of the timelines and cost estimates that they have for the different tranches of the evolving grid projects. They now call them the GRIP projects. Evolving grid just sounds better to me. And there's some tension with their preference customers and the rest of their transmission customers with respect to how those projects move forward and get funded. And Bonneville's going to have to sort through all those very complicated issues as well. Next slide, please. So to that end, we're planning on studying in the ISP process a number of different transmission sensitivities to evaluate the impact of regional transmission on the portfolio. We're going to include a PSE cross cascades build, which would include a double circuit 500 kV transmission line from our local service territory to Mid-C, and would include all of BPA's GURP 1/evolving grid capacity. We're going to perform another sensitivity that's a variation of that, which is PSE cross cascades build, but phase it in. Again, double circuit structure build from our service territory to Mid-C, but then assume one of the circuits is energized in 2035, and then you come along and deploy the conductor on the other side of the double circuit towers to be energized in 2045. Also includes BPA GURP 1.0 capacity in play. And the reason why we're showing 1.0 primarily is the Bonneville TC27 process is still playing out. It will have a huge determination on what transmission service requests that they've received stay in the queue. There's some question as to whether enough transmission service requests will stay in their queue after that process unfolds, and after the various RFPs of the various utilities around the region unfold to maintain all of the projects or most of the projects in their GURP 2.0. And so we wanted to be able to analyze what that would look like. Scenario number 3 is North Plains connector option number 1. When we originally signed on to North Plains connector, we had signed on for up to capacity in an amount of 750 megawatts, but we want to look at multiple things. With that, that wasn't a commitment by any means. It was a non-binding MOU just to have access to an option to potentially take that much. So the North Plains connector option number 1 that we're going to study is going to be 375 megawatt stake in North Plains connector, bidirectional to be able to access North Dakota wind resources. North Plains connector option number 2 will study a 375 megawatt west to east value, but have a larger east to west value. So 525 megawatts east to west to allow for the utilization or greater utilization of the asset to serve PSE load. And then the 5th scenario that we have that we're contemplating is the North Plains connector plus coal strip transmission upgrades. There has to explain what that is. I think, gosh, it's been 13 or 14 years ago now, before even the current regional planning organization, which is called Northern Grid, existed. The old regional planning organization called Northern Tier Transmission Group undertook an economic study request to understand what it would take to increase the transfer capability on the coal strip transmission system. And so this would include that scope, which was effectively adding series compensation to the CTS lines in a couple of places to increase the capacity. What we think is going to be about 500 to 600 megawatts potentially. So this scenario will include North Plains connector, will include the coal strip transmission upgrades. It will also include Bonneville's M2W transmission upgrades that are in flight, where they're going to be adding their own series of their own series compensation to their lines, and then I think they have a small reconductor that they have to do on as part of it on their system as well, plus a PSE cross cascades build. So we're really trying to get a sense of if you make that connection in across the Cascades between eastern and western Washington, and then you increase capacity from Washington to Montana, through Montana, and then add in that additional capacity or that additional transmission to be able to actually access the Eastern interconnection. What does that look like? And then looking at different versions, a Colstrip transmission upgrade, plus a Montana to Washington transmission upgrade. And so a little bit pared back from that. And then something in the middle there between those two, which is Colstrip transmission upgrades, plus Montana to Washington transmission upgrades, plus the PSE Cross Cascades build. So those are the suite of the very complicated incremental transmission additions that we're going to analyze as part of or as scenarios in this ISP process. Next slide, please. Nope, looks like that was it. So that was a lot, and I know that slide was very wordy, and there's a lot to digest there. So feel free if there's questions, or we can see if we can answer some.
Well, Sean, I first want to just say thank you so much for going through all of those slides so thoroughly. That was a lot of information. We've had a lot of great questions already. We have about 5 minutes more for questions. I know, Quinn, you have one. I want to first start with the question of, does anyone who hasn't had a chance to ask Sean a question have a question for Sean? I don't see anything in the chat, but if you haven't had a chance to ask a question and you have one, please hop on screen or post something in the chat so we can get your question answered. And I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so anyone else have a question or comment for Sean in the next 4 minutes? I think, Quinn, you had your hand up before, so thank you for waiting. Oh, I see Katie's first, and then we'll go to Quinn. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. I have a few things as we wrap up here. I just want to first appreciate PSE for looking into ways to get these clean energy zones to PSE's territory. We appreciate the effort to try to explore creative solutions in that way. I would love to hear more about how PSE is taking action to get these projects to fruition. I know that PSE is active in various regional planning forums where these things are discussed, but in terms of like actionable progress, would love to hear more about how these things are going to come into shape. So that's one more general question, but in terms of something more specific, I think this is slide 32. My question is whether the preferred portfolio will be able to select transmission options if the sensitivities show that they're lower cost or lower risk. Thank you.
So I will defer to Jen on the mechanics of the ISP process and what it selects or what it doesn't. With respect to what we're doing to try and work and advance those projects, North Plains Connector, for what it's worth, is a project that's being developed by an independent developer, and they've spent extensive time working on it. They actually have a pretty interesting development model where they start with effectively the ground first. You look at a map of electrical lines, transmission lines, and say, okay, I want to get from point A to point B, but they make no presumption about what that route would look like. And then they go out and they hit the ground and they talk to landowners and they talk to communities and they talk to tribes, and find out what's the least offensive route, I guess is the right way to put it, that folks can get behind. And in doing so, they were able to secure something like 98 or 99% of the land rights. They haven't perfected all those easements by any means, but they've been able to secure the options on that land almost entirely before they even started off with their interconnection processes. And so it's kind of a unique model in comparison to what you see. But it gives us a lot of hope that project will be able to achieve its 2032 in-service date that it's aiming for. And so to that end, we're collaborating with them and all the other potential participants in that to figure out what's the best way to try and move that forward. And then, of course, we need to make sure it makes sense for us, right? So that's why we're having it included in our ISP process. With Cross Cascades, it's first we need to make sure that it's something that we want to move forward with, and it's something that makes sense for the portfolio. And then at that point, it would be about making decisions about how do you go out and develop that. Do you partner with somebody? Do you is it attractive where you can bring in somebody else to help work on that with you? Can you collaborate with Bonneville on it? Can you if not, do you need to sort of go alone? We don't know yet what the WIDA will look like. Is there an opportunity to figure out a way to move it forward, in some sort of partnership with that? Do any of our, gosh, I can't even speak. Do any of our peers in the Puget Sound area have needs that potentially we could mutually address together? You start down the process of figuring out what that looks like. But one of the first steps is making sure that it makes sense and is something that we need, we want to pursue, because the portfolio analysis says that it's the right thing to do. I know, Jen, do you want to talk about what the mechanics of the ISP look like with respect to selecting things?
Sure. I think we're still working through that together, and we plan to do that in the fall. But I kind of, to Sean's point, we'll look across these scenarios and sensitivities and help us inform what the best decision would be. To your point, one of these could be a sensitivity here could be a better option than the reference case, and we may want to leverage that resource or this transmission project in that case. And so I think we're going to think through that more and then attempt to kind of talk through that together in the fall as we pull together the preferred portfolio.
Thanks for that, Jen. We're at 2:46, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for our public comment period. I know, Quinn, that you had a question earlier that you weren't able to ask. So if you still have that question, you can pop on right now and ask it quickly, and then we'll move on to public comment.
I do, and it should be quick. I'm curious how PSE might be building in or considering the State Transmission Authority.
It's a good question. Obviously we know it's forthcoming. One of the when the legislation was being drafted, one of our primary perspectives in helping to inform that was, is there an opportunity to help to have WIDA help fix the hard part? Designing and building transmission is not the hard part. When you know where resources are coming from, and you know where the load is, planning what a line looks like to be able to serve that's not the hard part. We've been, as an industry and the company, we've been doing that for a very, very long time. The hard part is figuring out how to find the right of way, and then be able to permit it. And so still yet to be determined on what those processes are, that the WIDA will bring to bear to be able to enable that, what the processes look like that we'll have to go through. To the extent that there's an opportunity to partner and leverage some of the state's authority, that will be great. I think we need to pull every lever we can. We just don't know what it looks like yet. And so I think it's too early to tell how that will work or what that will look like.
Thanks for that question, Quinn. And Sean, thank you again for a great presentation and for handling so many good questions and comments. With that, we are going to transition to our last section of the agenda, which is to lay out the next steps and also to invite public comments. Before we have public comments, I'm just going to quickly walk through next steps post-meeting. But I do want to get a sense of how many folks are interested in making a public comment. So if you could raise a virtual hand real quick, and I can get a quick count. So, okay, I see Don Marsh. Are there others who are interested in making public comment? And I'll ask again, but I just wanted to get a little bit of a head count. Okay, I'm not seeing any others, but I will ask again. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to quickly remind everybody, and maybe this is new to some folks, but there's a feedback process for these RPAG meetings. We posted in the chat, and Ben, I'm going to invite you to please post again the feedback form. This is an opportunity to ask questions or make comments based on today's meeting, and responses to those will be provided 4 weeks after the meeting. You have until, oh, I believe I lost my deadline here. You have until June 30th to post a question or comment in this feedback form. And then PSE will compile, respond, and then post the responses right before the next meeting. Ben, I'm also going to ask you if you don't mind to repost the feedback form from the May RPAG meeting. I think it may not have gotten posted in the everyone chat, so I want everyone on the webinar to be able to see it. Okay, so that's the feedback process, and this slide just lays out kind of exactly how things happen. 1 week prior to the next meeting is when you'll begin to be invited to ask questions. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is the website where you can get all information related to the RPAG. You can see that the RPAG meetings are laid out really clearly. Agendas, slide decks for each of those meetings is on this website. So are summaries of the meetings. So please feel free to make a note of this website so you have access. Next slide, please. Upcoming activities. I mentioned already that June 30th is the deadline for any further questions or comments on today's meeting. And then the next RPAG meeting will be on July 28th. So please mark your calendars. Next slide. This is contact information for PSE. There's an email address. There's the feedback form again. The web address, it's also posted in the chat. You can leave a voicemail at the phone number there. You can subscribe to the email list via this link, which is in the slide deck. And again, you can visit the website. So with that, next slide, please. We are now at our public comment opportunity. Next slide. Okay, I want to just quickly run through how public comment will be done. Jen, I saw you just hopped on, so I wanted to see if you had something you wanted to add. Oh, no, okay. Okay, so this is how we're going to do public comments. We invite you to please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to provide a comment. Everybody has up to 3 minutes to give your comment. There will be a little timer on the screen just to keep it really clear how much time people have remaining. We ask that your comments be kept and relate to today's topics. And we ask that all comments are respectful, that there's no personal or institutional attacks. Just, try to keep respectful comments and keep it factual. All comments and questions that are raised in the public comment period will also be included in the feedback report, along with PSE's response. And again, this is the email address that you can send questions and comments to if you don't want to make one here today. I think that is it. So go ahead and stop sharing the screen, please, Sam. And if you don't mind putting up the timer. I'm going to ask again, I know that Dawn, you had your hand up to provide a public comment. Are there others who are interested in providing public comment? I'd love to see a quick virtual hand if you don't mind. I'm still not seeing any. If one pops up and I miss it, somebody on the team, please let me know. But I think we'll go ahead and start with you, Dawn, and we've got the timer up on the screen. Dawn, if you could come on camera, if you're able to. Ben, did you go ahead and give?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just wait for Dawn to come on screen here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there you are. Okay, Dawn, go ahead and start the timer, Sam, and go ahead, Dawn.
Thank you. I'm Don Marsh, chair of the Washington Clean Energy Coalition and a member of the Sierra Club Energy Committee. We appreciate the work behind this analysis today, but PSE is offering a choice between two extremes: an all-battery case PSE calls unrealistic, and reference B, the largest gas build-out in PSE's history, approximately 20 new gas peaker plants. Even if PSE performs lots of sensitivity studies, this framing biases the outcome from the start. I've served on at least 3 advisory groups in the past, and I watched as sensitivities that were requested by a majority of group members were not studied because PSE ran out of time. So I'd like to make 3 points, which align with requests this group has heard previously. First, please model a middle reference case. Both UTC staff and Renewable Northwest have asked for a realistic case between the two extremes, more robust than all batteries, but not leaning on emerging gas peakers. PSE repeatedly declined these requests. We urge you to model a neutral baseline that doesn't require $100 billion of batteries or 5 gigawatts of gas. Second, please model storage and iron-air batteries realistically. PSE credits new storage at roughly 10% of its capacity and treats 100-hour iron-air as unavailable until 2035. These assumptions are contradicted by E3's regional study, which found iron-air contributing 63 to 77%, and by PSE's own plan to pilot a Form Energy iron-air battery by the end of this year. Third, make the comparison symmetric and public. PSE hasn't disclosed what capacity value it gives the flex fuel peakers, or whether the cost of securing and delivering their fuel is included in the $2,000 per kilowatt figure. If clean resources are subject to conservative discounts, the peakers should meet the same standard, with every assumption published side by side. The stakes for your customers and the regional economy are high. PSE's modeling shows customer costs rising nearly 7% a year, with billions of dollars of carbon allowance costs and decades of stranded asset risk. Finally, our ask is simple. Don't lock in this reference case until these assumptions are tested. We request independent validation of the key inputs. Get this right, and the plan can serve customers, the climate, and Washington law. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Perfect timing. Appreciate that comment. All right, one last call for public comments. Please raise a virtual hand if you have them. And Sam, I think I'm not seeing any, so I think you can stop sharing your screen. Thank you so much for doing that. And with that, I just want to thank everybody so much for attending today's meeting of the RPAG. Again, our next meeting is in July, and I am going to hand it over to Jen Colson from PSE, who is going to close out the meeting.
Yeah, thanks, Hillary. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for being here today. We really appreciate your engagement, your thoughtful questions, and the dialogue that we had. And looking forward to more conversations next month. Thank you.